Give us the latest in terms of where the flare-up leaves us in terms of some of these tensions and possible full-on war.
Well, Kriti, we're more than 24 hours since those strikes and counterstrikes took place, and many analysts are calling this an escalatory de-escalation, in the sense that it's been more than a month now that the region has been on tenterhooks, anticipating some form of a retaliation or a response out of Hezbollah and its proxies in the region, even from Iran themselves, in retaliation to the killing of its senior commander, Fuad Shukr, at the end of July. And indeed, over the course of the last couple of weeks, Hezbollah had hinted that this retaliation was forthcoming. Well, it did happen early in the morning on Sunday. And in the end, Hezbollah acted alone. They fired more than 300 rockets towards northern Israel, some even directed towards central Israel, causing very limited military infrastructure losses. There was indeed the loss of one Navy soldier's life. But crucially here is that Israel also engaged in a preemptive strike on Hezbollah's assets about half an hour before the attack took place, taking down what they say is the equivalent of thousands of rockets that Hezbollah would have launched towards Israel, foiling the possibility of a bigger attack. And so this counterstrike has taken place. And what's key here is both sides are saying that this was a victory. Israel is saying that they helped thwart a bigger attack. And then you heard from the Secretary General of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, towards the evening yesterday. He was saying that this first phase of response was a success. And for the time being, they're going to reassess whether a second phase is needed, hence indicating that the first phase of retaliation is indeed over for now. And what I would just point out is, even though Israel declared a state of emergency early on Sunday morning, the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange actually closed up on the day, which signals that many in the region do think that the worst is over or has been avoided for now.
Yeah, Joumanna, what's very interesting is it seems very difficult to distinguish between whether we are closer to war or closer to a ceasefire. We have this conversation kind of in either direction. Last week it was looking like a ceasefire. Those discussions are underway. How did the events of this weekend impact those talks?
Yeah, you know, one thing that I thought was really interesting is several hours after the attack took place, an Israeli delegation actually headed to Cairo to continue those discussions with the CIA director, with the head of Egypt's intelligence, as well, with the view of continuing along with the negotiations of that ceasefire deal. And we know that the U.S. have been pushing very actively all throughout the course of last week. You even heard Kamala Harris talk about it at the DNC. It is a focus of the Biden administration now to get this ceasefire deal across the line. Very significant that Israel did decide to still attend those discussions in Cairo on Sunday. That being said, it still feels as though there's a lot of daylight, and even Hamas themselves were not officially represented in the talks. There was a delegation there, and they were briefed on the discussions that took place between Qatar, Egypt, and Israel, and the U.S., of course, but they weren't there representing themselves at the table. One of the key sticking points that has emerged in the last week is that Israel wants to continue to have a presence along this so-called Philadelphia corridor, that is the border separating Egypt from Gaza. For Egypt, for Hamas, that's a non-starter. And so the question is how much wiggle room the two sides really have here to come to an acceptable compromise that would lead to a truce, that would lead to some sort of ceasefire, and very importantly for Netanyahu and his base back home to secure the release of hostages. So negotiations are still underway, but no major signal as of yet that a breakthrough is imminent.
Joumanna, how does this impact what Iran does next?
That is the question. And remember, the twin assassinations happened on the same evening. You had the assassination of the senior commander in Lebanon, the Hezbollah senior commander Fuad Shukr, and a couple of hours later, you had the targeted killing of Ismail Haniyeh, the then political leader of Hamas, who was in Tehran for the inauguration of Bercetche. That all happened in the same evening. And ever since then, both Iran and Hezbollah have been putting out comments after comments saying that they will retaliate and will not let these killings go unnoticed or not accounted for. And what is interesting is they've had a month to get their act together, and in the end, Hezbollah decided to act independently. We have not had an official response from Iran. And indeed, yesterday was the 40-day commemoration of Ashura. There were commemorations going on in the street, but not a lot of talk about the attack that took place between Hezbollah and Israel over the weekend. And so the feeling over here in the region is that Iran at this point is not looking for further escalation. They will have to do something to save face, to show that they've retaliated somehow for the embarrassing killing of Ismail Haniyeh on their own land. But at the same time, they're not in a position right now to push this into an all-out war. And certainly you could say that the deterrence and the fact that there is such a strong U.S. military presence right now in the region could be one catalyst for Iran not wanting to prod this any further. Furthermore, they're also waiting for the results of these ceasefire discussions, because if that truce does come into action, then it would signal that a whole lot of the temperature and pressure in the region can come down for a couple of months and allow things to get reassessed.